And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining Cybersecurity Podcast. I am your host, Sean Martin, and I'm thrilled to have a new episode of the series, Human-Centered Cybersecurity, that I get the joy of co-hosting with Julie Haney from NIST, where we get to talk about all kinds of cool things, human factors and beyond. Of course, as folks know who follow ITSPmagazine, Marco and I had a vision that the human element would be key, and we're great to see so much focus on this. And like I said, I'm thrilled to have Julie join me as a co-host for this conversation with Calvin Nobles. We're going to talk about just that, human factors, and how do we build a program, how do we build products, how do we build ops, and all the fun stuff with the human in mind. So Julie, just to refresh our guests' memory, who you are, what you're up to at NIST, and then we'll move over to Calvin to get some background on him.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. To reintroduce myself, I'm Julie Haney. I lead the Human-Centered Cybersecurity program at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST for short. Very excited to be a co-host on this sub-series of podcasts with Sean. Today, I'm very excited. I'm always excited about our guests. I'm very excited to have Dr. Calvin Nobles. He is the newly appointed Dean of the School of Cybersecurity and Information Technology at University of Maryland Global Campus. And he's joining us today to talk about human factors. I had the pleasure of meeting Calvin probably a couple months ago, and we've had a few discussions. He's super smart, very interesting. I'm sure you're going to be very interested in what he has to say. So welcome, Calvin. And just to start it off, we usually ask our guests, can you tell us about your current role and what was the path that got you there?
Well, thank you all for having me on the show. I'm very grateful to be here. And I'm also always excited to talk about human factors, the human element in cybersecurity. So my current role, as Julie said, I'm currently the Dean of the School of Cybersecurity and Information Technology. And I recently was working as the department chair at the Illinois Institute of Technology, leading the cybersecurity and IT programs and everything that comes with that. And so one of the things about being in academia is you get to do research. And so my research area pertains to the human element in cybersecurity. And so I just recently wrote a short paper for an academic conference where I took a look at the definition of human factors that currently exist in the literature. And I will tell you, looked over 100 some odd articles and came up with 16 definitions of human factors, all different definitions, but there was some commonalities, so I was able to capture that in the article. But again, it made me think about how do we really define human factors in cybersecurity. And so one of the reasons why this is so important to me is because when I started working in cybersecurity, one of the things I realized is that there was a lot of parallels with aviation. And so I couldn't let that go. And so I started crosswalking the human factors over to cybersecurity. And what I realized, there's a significant gap around the human element. I know we talk about the human element. In some cases, some people say, you all talk negatively about it. We're just trying to bring the science with human factors in cybersecurity. The human element, don't get me wrong, our workers and our cybersecurity professionals in cybersecurity are some of the brightest in the world. But just like anybody else, they have some times when they have weaknesses and limitations, and we must design around those so that we can optimize human behavior and performance.
Well, the way I look at it, and I'll kick it off with this, is yes, they're super smart. Yes, they work really hard. So why would we not treat them well? Why would we just say, they're smart, they can deal with whatever we toss at them and let them figure it out? No, and we look at different organizations. I remember I have a connection back to kind of like the early days of the set-top box before everything was cloud stream now. But a big investment in human factors to understand how people would interact with a device connected to TV to make that whole viewing experience different and better. And that was purposeful to make the experience better. And I think that can be applied. And I often talk about on the show that security is due for a transformation. And that can cross everything from how we fit into the business. So we drive value for the business, not just protect and reduce risk. But I also think in terms of operations and teams. So some of this I'm sure we'll touch on, where we have a chance to make the environment better, make the experience better, make the teams better, make the outcomes better. And I truly believe that they're centered and rooted in the topic we're going to talk about today. So Julie, you want to kick it off with some of your ideas?
Sure. So it was very interesting when I met you, Calvin, and read some of the articles, because like you mentioned, there's like 16 different definitions of human factors, and people kind of misuse it sometimes or aren't complete. So I'm wondering, how do you define, what is the definition of human factors more as a scientific discipline?
So is it one long description combining all 16, Calvin?
No. One of the things I believe in simplicity. How do we keep it simple? And so, my basic definition of human factors from a scientific perspective is it's a systematic approach to optimizing human performance and behavior based on the designing of the system so that human can fit into the system and environment that we build for them. And so, in other words, we, just like in aviation, they build the cockpit. So when the pilots get in there, it's very standardized, really built for the pilots. We must take that same approach in cybersecurity, that we build an environment so that we account for human limitations and human weaknesses, but the end users still have the ability to attain optimum behavior and performance.
And I mean, one of the things I was thinking, Calvin, is that we see a lot of other terms that have relationships to human factors. So usability, human-computer interaction. What are the relationships between human factors? Are those just a subset?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the United States, human factors were born out of experimental psychology. And then a few years later, it started taking shape and became human factors as what the human factors professionals know it today. And so based out of that, there's some other things that grew out of that. Some of those things are human-computer interaction. When personal computers started becoming ubiquitous, one of the things we noticed was that we needed an area that really focused on us to help us produce and engineer user interfaces and get that user experience that's going to be very positive. And so that's where human-computer interaction came from. So in other words, human factors gave birth to HCI. When we talk about usability and some of the other words you hear things like human machine interaction also in cybersecurity, and you heard in other fields. One thing we have to remember is that human factors gave birth to all of those fields. Now, one of the things we have to take into account, human factors is a vast domain. Human factors is in everything we do. And so I clearly understand why the computer sciences and the other professionals carved out an area. The medical community did it too. And so it works in their favor. It really gives them the opportunity to reduce risk. And so I understand how HCI and some of the other areas came about because the field is very big. And so I think we should do likewise in cybersecurity.
So you talked about interfaces there, and Julie mentioned kind of the interaction, and that was kind of the story I gave as well, right? The interaction or engagement with the system. And you described, Calvin, about fitting in nicely there. It's not just the actions, right? The pulling of levers and turning of knobs, pressing of keys. It's also what we see, perhaps what we hear, the response we get when we interact.
Right.
Obviously, we look at phones and things where we get the haptics, right? Where we actually feel something as we're typing, those types of things. How important are all of the senses, incoming and outgoing, when we talk about this?
Very important. In some cases, we have some organizations that have built extremely complex cyber ecosystems. And so when you talk about maximizing your senses, whether we're hearing, whether we're touching, or whether it may be, we can easily overload the user and put them in an information overload situation, or we can put them in a situation to where the cognitive battery is draining rather quickly if they're doing very demanding tasks. And so we have to account for that. And so one of the things that managers have to really understand, how cognitively demanding is the job or the functions that those individuals are doing. You can't put someone in a cognitively demanding environment and leave them in there for 6 to 8 hours and think that they're going to have the same level of production as someone who's doing low-level tasks. And so these are the things we have to start training and helping us understand how do we bring this type of expertise to the cyber domain and help managers, help give them extra tools in their toolkits to help them manage the performance of their people.
So, yeah, I was wondering, do you want to ask Julie? Or
Go ahead.
All right. So, I mean, my brain is filled with so many things, but one of the things we want to touch on is kind of how this relates into cybersecurity specifically. So what are some of the most pressing issues that you see here? I mean, you kind of touched on the fatigue element of it, and keeping people proactive, active and engaged. So what are some of the things you're seeing that we need to focus on, do you think?
You know, I'm glad you mentioned the thing up the part there about fatigue. I wrote a paper several years ago around human performance issues in cybersecurity. And when we talk about human performance issues in cybersecurity, we're not talking about performance evaluation that's driven by HR. We're talking about the actual performance of actually working in a cybersecurity environment and that very large cybersecurity ecosystem. And so when we talk about performance, we talk about fatigue, distractions, burnout, stress, the lack of prioritization. We can go forever and list a whole laundry list of things that actually impacts human performance. And so at the end of the day, one of the things that concern me is the lack of cybersecurity professionals in the industry. We know there's a talent gap. I mean, there's different arguments around that for a whole nother show, right? And so we'll park that right there. But we got cybersecurity professionals who are coming to work every day, and they're on small teams or teams that are under-resourced, or teams that lack the technological capability they need, or a team that's not getting the training they need to stay up to speed. Another factor that we have to account is the adversary, the bad guy, the threat actor gets a vote. And so it keeps them on their toes constantly. So it's not like they get to stop during the marathon and get a quick walk. It's like they got to be constantly moving forward at that marathon pace, because the bad guys moving at that marathon pace as well. And bad guys can produce offensive capabilities faster than we can engineer defense. Sorry about that. And so we have to take that into account. And so all these things have an impact on the human element in there, and people get tired, they get frustrated, and it's not like they get a time off. And so it's just constant. And so that constant grind over time put people in a state of where they're very fatigued, where they might be stressed out. And we're not even talking about the personal stressors that individuals have in their lives, whether they're dealing with a health issue, a family issue, the loss of a loved one. Those things hurt too, and they have an impact on our cybersecurity professionals. And so we have to take pages from other socio-technical industries, like what they do in healthcare. When a doctor's not feeling well and he's a surgeon, he don't perform surgery that day, and nobody's questioning him. Same thing about a pilot. If a pilot is not feeling well, he or she does not get in the cockpit that day. They call a reserve pilot in. As customers, we wait, the crew get there, and then we take off, right? And so how do we bring practices like that into cybersecurity so we can make sure we're taking good care of our cybersecurity professionals?
Yeah, and so I'm wondering, obviously human factors is very important in cybersecurity, but, are organizations thinking about this? Do they have human factors programs? How are they doing with that? What's kind of the status quo with that?
Well, I speak on this subject across the nation, and I have a slide that I showed during my presentation. And so one of the slides I show is which engineering discipline is missing. And then I say, don't worry, it's an open book test and we'll walk through it. And I was like, how many of you have network engineers? Hands go up. How many of you have software engineers? Hands go up. How many of you got computer engineers? Hands go up. How many of you have human factors engineers? Hands don't go up. And so the thing that we have to understand from that is that most organizations don't have the organic talent to address the human element the way it needs to be addressed. we have to also understand that when we talk about people, most people think they know about people, but this is a really complicated area to the fact that where if you look at the aviation community, the healthcare community, mining operations, maritime operations, they all have human factors professionals on the team for a reason. It's because they're trying to create an environment where they can reduce the risk from human performance and poor behavior. So I think that's something that we have to account for. And so I think as soon as we can start realizing that we need to have human factors practitioners on our teams, I think we'll be able to make better traction than what we're making right now.
And I want to poke you a little bit on the engineering part of that title, because my experience building products for a security company, mind you, and thinking about this, it comes in at the product requirements phase, and it comes in at the user story part of the building out, where we're saying, here's the experience we want, here's what we want the system to do, here's where the data comes into play, here's where the network and the endpoint comes into play, here's where the person interacting comes into play. So to me, it's part of that which then feeds other engineers. So I'm wondering, this is naive, but is there a human factors engineer that you also need sitting next to your software engineer and your network engineer and your computer systems engineer, as well as somebody who, like I described in my experience, has a focus on the use case of the user stories and the product requirements part of it? Do you need both?
If I get this question a lot, and they would ask me, if you could have a human factors engineer, where would you put him? I said, I would take his seat and I would park it right beside your principal security architecture and let them two work together to understand. And that's where I would start. And the reason you want to understand is because, first of all, your human factors engineer have to develop a sense of the environment. It's not like they're coming off the street and they're going to be smart on your environment right away. They need to learn your environment. And from there, I think they can start branching out and working with different teams and get a feel for where your friction areas are. Every organization is different. Once you determine where your human friction areas are, you can start working and solving problems and bringing about solutions to reduce those frictions.
So I'm wondering, because as I'm thinking, there's usually pushback when you say we need to hire someone new, right? We need to hire a human factors engineer. Is there any way? I mean, obviously, a human factors engineer, trained person is going to be the expert in it. But can we somehow raise the bar a little bit, just raise the awareness of human factors among the cybersecurity professionals that we have now? Would that help? Or maybe the next generation of cybersecurity professionals?
Julie, that's a great question. And one of the things that I realized is that human factors professionals are in high demand. They're not sitting on the sideline waiting to get in the game, right? They're employed in other social technical domains. So if I had to think about what's the best way for us to approach this in cybersecurity, I would approach it from taking your cybersecurity professionals, educating them in human factors, whether it's through a certification program, in some cases a master's degree, or in some cases on-the-job training, working with someone that you contract out and bring them in with the human factors expertise so they can start to develop the skills and come up to speed. And so that's a huge problem there that we are not even looking at. Where are we going to get this human factors talent from? Because those individuals are highly employed in other places, and they're doing a great job in making those other places safer.
I was wondering if you could give a couple of examples, maybe something adjacent, maybe very tech oriented, where cybersecurity professionals can say, I can see that environment looks like mine. And they benefited tremendously by having human factors engineering involved.
Right. So let's think about nuclear power and nuclear engineering. When you look at those power plants, now they don't show us the inside of those places for reasons, but when you think, they do show us with the operators working at those control boards with all those massive, knobs and those massive gauges, right? And those individuals are responsible for learning and reading those gauges and understand what's happening behind those gauges. And so human factors engineers play a huge role in helping them design the layout of of that panel that they're looking at, those gauges, and the training programs so that those individuals can really understand what's happening with the plant with us not seeing the plant. And so that's just one example. The other example I love to use is when we think about NASA. NASA is all about building around that astronaut and keeping those astronauts safe. And I watch the NASA channel. I'm a junkie. And so I pick up a lot of things from a human factors perspective. If you look at how much assistance the astronaut gets in some cases from the people back in the support stations and playing in those support roles, the reason being that is because they need to be focusing on the critical missions and things at hand. So it helps them out tremendously when they got people back in the control station saying, well, what about this? Running checklist for them, doing monotonous tasks that the astronaut don't need to be focusing on at that particular time. And so the other one I love to use is think about a surgical team going into surgery. A human factors engineer is not going to be in surgery, but you know what? They look at the spaces and they make sure those spaces are designed so that surgical team can get in and get out with that surgery. And everything they do in there is about teamwork and executing at a high rate while they're also looking at reducing human error in those procedures. And so those are some areas that we can look at how human factors have played a critical role in some really technical fields.
Yeah, those are great examples. And thinking back a little bit about your previous comments about teaching human factors to cybersecurity professionals. I know that you've been quite involved in that. And you also did some work to see, what universities are incorporating human factors courses in their cybersecurity programs, computer science programs. So what did you find, and how are you what's the approach that you're taking to teach human factors to these people that are, in these technical professions?
Right. So the research we did, we just took a very simple look at how many universities was actually accredited through the National Security Agency and through the Academic Centers of Excellence for Cybersecurity. And what we found out, we looked at the graduate level and we looked at the undergraduate level. And so I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head. I believe at the undergraduate level, I believe there was like 232 programs when we looked at it, and only 14 offer a course with human factors or something related in the title. And when we looked at the graduate levels of programs, I think there was over 300, about 306 programs, and there was only 7 that offered a course in human factors. So we need to do better in terms of helping academia understand the significance of this. We watch industry flail at this every day. And as academics, we got to say, how do we help them solve that problem? And then one of the ways we can help them solve that problem is bringing human factors into the classroom. And what do we mean by in the classroom? Bringing the scientific approach in the classroom, helping students understand what human factors is as a discipline and keep it based in the science so that we can actually leverage that in industry. I know I won't name the universities, but I developed human factors courses for 2 universities, and one university, it's one of the best courses. I mean, I have to limit the number of seats in the course because I can't teach a graduate level course with that many students in it. But one of the other things I really want to do is work with you, Julie, and Sean, work with you and find out how we can develop workshops to take this to universities to help them understand how to develop this course and teach this course. Because I think, courses in human factors and cybersecurity is necessary. And I think with my students, they would tell you it's a lot of work. But what I get out of this course is I'm exploring things I never done before through a different lens that's going to help me understand how the human element is supposed to be integrated the right way into cybersecurity. And mostly what we see today in cybersecurity, we build everything. We build this technological front, and then we just expect humans to gather around it. That's not human-centered. And so how do we bring that human-centered approach back to cybersecurity through the science of human factors engineering? And that's what we got to do.
And I was excited. I was going like this, raising that you had a course. And then you said it's full. I was totally deflated. Not that I'd be smart enough to take that course anyway, but I'm joking, of course. But no, I love that you're doing that work, Calvin. And I think for this to be successful, it has to be a full circle, right? So
right.
the universities need to understand the value, the students need to understand the value, the hiring organizations need to understand the value, so that this kind of builds itself and ends up taking off. Let's look at the organization for a moment, because these students need a place to go in cybersecurity once they have this learning. What are some of the signs that cybersecurity program is flailing or failing or some other ing because they don't have this expertise in-house?
So some of the signs you'll see are chief information security officers are burning out, and they're burning out pretty quick. And one of the things we have to start taking a look at is, why are they burning out? What's causing that burnout? Can we have something as a human factors council, something that take a look across organization's cybersecurity program and say, you are burning your sizzle out, and it's having a cascading effect and burning out others. Identify some security controls we can put in place, or some type of programs or other initiatives we can put in place to identify that. For instance, when I was in the squadron, we had a human factors council. And one of the things we did with that council, when there was an aviator or air crewman who was unable to perform his or her duties, they could come to the aviation safety office and say, I got a problem, I got an issue, I need to leave the airplane for a while. And there was no harm, no foul. And we worked with that individual. And when they got to a better place, whatever it was, they came back, we put them through training, and we put them back on the aircraft. Something like that in the cybersecurity world might be what we need, but I also understand that these companies are out here to be profitable. It's a different environment when you're talking about a military environment compared to a company that's trying to make a profit. But at the end of the day, we got to find a way where we can start reducing the amount of human errors we see in the cybersecurity space. And I would tell you, I'm doing research right now around the cloud environment. We're looking at cloud misconfigurations. And one of the things we're hearing from all of the people that we're interviewing, how complex it is. It's extremely complex. And the other thing we're hearing is that there's no training that really focuses on cloud misconfiguration. Now, they get a lot of training on the configuration aspects, but they don't get anything specifically addressing cloud misconfiguration. And so there's some things we can do from a human factors perspective to really help these organizations be a lot more successful than what they are.
Yeah, Calvin, you mentioned human error, that we need to find ways to reduce human error. And I know in my own work, one of the topics that are always like the hot topic, the thing that people want to hear most about is security awareness training, right? A lot of organizations kind of pin that the human factor, right, on security awareness and training. And you had a great quote in one of your position papers. You said, equating human error to a training and awareness issue is a fallacy. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. And I say this up front about cybersecurity awareness. I do believe it's important. But in a lot of organizations, they get cybersecurity awareness once a year. And a lot of times they're going to get it early in the year. And when they get it early in the year, think about that. The environment where we work in cybersecurity is constantly changing. There's new technique, tactics, and procedures that the adversary is throwing at us every day. And so if someone gets training in March, that person's not going to get more training until the following March. So look at the time lapse, in that time that new techniques could affront these individuals, and they might not know what to do. And so that's why I believe if you're basing everything on cybersecurity awareness, that's wrong from the start. But cybersecurity awareness is important. And then you also hear me say on some of my presentations, everybody don't eat mayonnaise. And what I mean by that is that you can't give everybody the exact same cybersecurity awareness. If you work in HR, you need something that's modified for your environment. If you work as a IT or a cybersecurity professional, you need something that's modified, that's tailored to you. And the same thing for our senior executives. They need cybersecurity awareness tailored to them because they are very visible targets, right? And so you can't feed everybody mayonnaise because everybody don't eat mayonnaise. And so that's why I believe that, we got so much focus on cybersecurity awareness. That's just one piece of it. I think there's some other things we can do in terms of like understanding where people are they best suited for their positions. And if they're in those positions, have you prioritized their work so they can optimize their performance? Are you putting too much on them and they're not saying anything? Because in cybersecurity, a lot of workers are afraid to speak out because it's seen as a sign of weakness, or you don't want to be the one to rock the boat. And so that's another thing that human factors professionals can help you with, is establishing those open communications, like what we see in aviation when they say, if you see something, say something. In some cases, saying that in cybersecurity don't always return, in a favorable way for you. And so we have to continue to work to include and improve our communications. We have to also work to understand that the chain of communication is up and is down. And one of the things that I love when we talk about awareness is that in one of my courses for the midterm, they have to come up with a modified cybersecurity human factors analysis classification system, the same system that the aviation community and the other transportation industry use to investigate an accident. And so they modify it for the cyber environment. And one of the reasons I love teaching that it's nothing more than an error taxonomy. And the reason I love teaching it is there's 4 levels in it. And at the very top, there's a level called organizational influences. And that level is where you capture things like organization preparedness, organizational resources, organizational resource allocation, policies, governance. The thing I'm trying to say here is this is where you catch your executive responsibilities, right? But if you think about it, every time we talk about a data breach or something happening in that aspect, we always look at the lower level. But with the HFAX model, you just can't look at the lower level and say that was the root cause. You have to walk it up to every level. And by the time you walk it up to the top level and you start identifying the factors there, what you realize is that there's no stone left unturned for something catastrophic happening in an organization, from a data breach, a cyber attack, or a ransomware attack. And so, again, that's another training mechanism that I would like to see organizations use in cybersecurity, because it will help give a bigger picture, a broader picture, and it helps senior leaders understand I played a role in that, a more significant role than what I thought. And so it's just not pinning the tail on the donkey at the lowest level. You got to pin that tail on that donkey up high, because the decisions made up there have cascading effects.
Who you calling a donkey? My tail hurts. No, I want to stay on this human error thing, because I think you touched on it earlier and just now as well. Am I getting feedback? You're good. Because the procedures, a lot of times, this is how we do things. Here are the playbooks. Here's how you participate in that, and then there's always an exception where something doesn't fit the playbook, or you're not fitting because, like you described, I'm a little stressed or I'm tired or whatever the situation may be, and things happen. People are human, but a lot of times it's the procedure, and the procedure isn't flexible enough, or we've abstracted the detail so far away from the user that they can't make better decisions, right? So they only have the guidance at the abstraction level. So we don't set them up to succeed in many cases. And I have an issue with the word error in that sense, because in many cases they're following what's been prescribed, and the procedure failed, it's not a human error. So how do organizations look at that? And I know it's probably earlier up front, looking at the policies and the procedures and whatnot, but how do organizations recognize that may be an issue for them, if it is?
Right. I think what you said is spot on. When there's a procedure issue, we always say it's a human error, but there's a correct way to say that without saying it's a human error. And so I think what organizations have to do is look at their procedures. And when you look at the procedures, you have to understand that what we call the error, a human error science. It's a lot of science that's been out there for a long time that other industries have really mastered. And when they mastered it, what it helps them understand is how to properly write your procedures. And not only just write your procedures, you have to test your procedures. And just like we do with cybersecurity, you don't test them in a live environment, but you walk through them and you have people to explain your procedures and you make sure they understand your procedures. Because can you imagine dealing with a cybersecurity incident and you don't have the procedures, or you don't know the steps, or you're dealing with someone who got a sick child at home? That person might be at work physically, but cognitively they're distracted. And so having strong procedures and having guidelines and having playbooks and having other instructions help them tremendously. I mean, like, we look at pilots and we're like, pilots are really cool, which they are cool. But if you notice, everything about them is already scripted. So when they get in the cockpit, it's almost like they're doing the same dance because they got standardized practices of doing things. Now, I get it. There's no way every flight is going to be the same, but because they have a very standardized way of doing things, it makes life easier for them. And we should be looking at that in cybersecurity. How can we implement things to make it easier for our cybersecurity professionals so we're not draining their cognitive batteries on a daily basis, and that battery runs out within that 8-hour work period. So I think there's a lot of things we can do. We also have to look at and understand, like you were saying, human errors is a broad field. You have lapses, you have slips, you have mistakes, you have unintentional, you have intentional. It's a broad field. And, sometimes it's very hurtful when we say, somebody made an error, somebody made a mistake, and we leave it as that. No, do the investigation to find out what happened. And what you will discover is that a lot of times it's more an organizational issue than it is an individual issue, right? And so that's how we have to look at human factors. It's layered. You got the organization, and then you got the management area in there, and then you got the individual. A lot of time it comes down to the individual level, and that's where we keep it. But we also have to raise it up a little and really explore what are some of the management issues that led to this, and what are some of the organizational issues that led to this. And this is why, again, I love the HFAX model, and I'm going to keep preaching that until we get a lot more people looking to leverage that in cybersecurity, because it gives you a broader look. And the other thing that we're looking to do with modified HFAX is it's used as a tool to explore accidents. But let's move it to the left of the boom and make it a proactive instrument that we can use to help organizations identify their weaknesses so they can put fixes in place so that we don't have to deal with the boom.
Yeah, that's definitely proactive is much better. I must say I love your cognitive battery. Love that. I'm gonna use that. So you talked about bringing it up to the organizational level. So if I'm a podcast listener and I work in an organization that does not have a human factors program as of yet, what kind of advice would you give to those organizations that are just starting out? What are kind of like the first steps?
The first thing I would ask any organizations to do is think about their human friction areas at work, whether it's fatigue, whether it's a shortage of talent, whether it's the lack of prioritization. I mean, when I worked in cybersecurity, every day, everything was a top priority. And that means, what we say when that happens, right? Think about when we have things that don't go well and there's no documentation, nothing codified to help the team work through that. So at best, they're ad hoc, right? How can we help them put emergent procedures in place to reduce the stress around that? How can we work with managers to understand that, when people come to work, they're not going to be physiologically 100% every day? Can managers, weigh in? How well do you know your people to be able to say, Julie, you don't look well today. Why don't you go home? We have it from here, to give you that break. These things matter because in other socio-technical domains, they have practices in place where people can take a time out or call a day off and everything is okay. And so what I really would like to see organizations do is really take a different look at human factors, take a look at it from the science aspect of it, and not when we say human factors from the working definition, all the bad things people do. we kind of stuck there, to be honest with you. And so I'm trying to pull us back from just thinking negatively and getting us to thinking more scientifically, where we can use human factors engineering to keep us to the left of those booms and to give us a better platform to take care of our people while they're at work.
And I know, Calvin, you've written some papers on this. You clearly have some courses available at some universities for this. I'm hopeful that you can share some resources with folks. But is there one thing you could say, based on our conversation today, that a team can do to redefine cybersecurity with human factors in mind?
Absolutely. There are several podcasts that, I was told this early to Julie earlier in the week. They get it right over in Europe. They're getting it right. I mean, they are moving, swim lanes ahead of us in human factors and cybersecurity. They got some things that they put out, like, for instance, the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society. They got a cyber technical group that they put out information and work. And then you got can I get this right? You got the Chartered Institute for Ergonomics and Human Factors. They got some great documents, white papers, and other things that really help you understand the human element in cybersecurity. And these things you can download from the internet. And I encourage everybody to, if you're really interested in really trying to solidify the human element in cybersecurity, I would start there. And I would say this too, and I put this call to action out to every human factors professional that's working in academia. We got work to do. We don't even have a textbook on human factors in cybersecurity. And I'm working to change that, to get a textbook out there so we have something to go to so people can say, I really want to know how I can solidify the human element in cybersecurity. Where do I start? I'm like, here's a textbook for you right here. And so I would love to do that and make sure that we start bringing this to the forefront, because right now, human factors in cybersecurity is not in the it's on the second team, and it needs to be on the first team.
Yeah, Calvin, this has been a wonderful discussion. I admire your work. I know Calvin is assembling a group of superstars to work with us at NIST to kind of set some direction for human factors in cybersecurity, to help bring more of the scientific and the research world into practice, to make those connections, to help educate our cyber workforce. I'm very excited to see where that collaboration goes. Yeah, Sean, any final thoughts? It's been a great discussion.
Well, if there's room for a donkey on that working group, I'm happy to participate in that. It is a super important project. So no, I think it's incredible the work you're doing, Calvin, and I love that it's rooted in research and science, which this whole series that Julie and I are putting together is connected to. And I'm thrilled for the work that you're doing, Julie, with NIST on this topic, both specific and broadly. And I think, it's a very interesting topic as well. When you start to poke into people's minds and how do they think and how do they interact with certain things and why do they do certain things that way, it may not just be because of what you built for them. It's how they are and interacting with what you built for them. So it's really exciting space to explore, and I'm thrilled you're doing it. Glad we had the chance to have this conversation, and hopefully many more. When the book comes out, maybe we can have a follow-up conversation and kind of walk through some of the highlights of that.
Absolutely, be more than happy to.
Perfect. All right. Well, I suspect there'll be a few good links to resources from Calvin that we can share with folks. And of course, I encourage you to follow Julie and NIST and Calvin and the work he's doing. And if you have a little spare time left over, please subscribe to Redefining Cybersecurity podcast and stay tuned to our stuff as well. Please share with your friends, family, and enemies. And we'll see you on the next one. Julie, always a pleasure to co-host these with you. You bring the amazing guests and the amazing topics to bear. And I'm very appreciative to that and all the cool questions too. And Calvin, thanks so much. We'll see you all on the next one.
Thank you.
Bye.